Hey guys, I'm Andrew Polino with the Sandbox, and this video is sort of a post-production 101 for 360 video editing. We're going to use Adobe Premiere and a couple of new plugins for 360-degree video editing, and we're going to use them to combine multiple clips, sort of fix up and enhance our video image, and go over the best way to overlay text and other 2D images. Okay, first of all, let's talk about the add-ons you'll need to use. You'll be needing the GoPro VR Player, which you can download for free at Color's website. And you'll be needing Mettle Skybox 360 VR Tools package, which, depending on when you're watching this, is either already integrated into Premiere's video effects, or not integrated yet, but available by request if you have a license for Adobe Creative Cloud. And if that's the case, you can send an email with your name and user ID to dvaplugin@adobe.com. By the way, if you run into any trouble getting the plugins, just reach out to us and we'll work you through it. So, the GoPro VR Player allows us to preview in real time how our edits look. Any changes that we make, any effects that we add on, will immediately be available in the GoPro VR Player. Now, Premiere does have a native VR player, which you can access by right-clicking on your preview window and enabling VR mode. You can see that small window that we can drag the mouse and look around in. But since GoPro VR gives you a bigger field of view, a higher quality image, and a little bit of an easier time just sort of toggling back and forth between the VR audience member view and the all-seeing equal rectangular view here in the preview window, I'm going to recommend that you use the GoPro VR Player. So, the first thing we'll need to do is connect the GoPro VR Player to Adobe Premiere. And to do that, go to Preferences, Playback, and make sure that the box next to Enable Mercury Transit is checked, and the GoPro VR Player is enabled under the devices. So now that we've got Premiere set up, GoPro VR Player connected, and the Mettle tools here in our Effects tab, let's start by importing our 360 clips. So, before we get to the effects we're going to use, a couple of tips on the best editing practices if you're combining multiple scenes. Now, unlike with standard video, you can't jump around or cut away in 360 video without it being jarring to the person watching and trying to look around. And this is especially true if they're watching in a VR headset. And that's why if you're going to have multiple clips in your 360 video, you want to give them time to breathe, give them some extra time to unfold, and above all, give the viewer enough time not just to look around in all directions, but to get sort of a sense of presence, get used to being in that scene. And of course, when it comes to how long each clip should be, a lot depends on what's happening in the scene. And you're also going to need to ease the viewer gently from one scene to the next, and that's why when I'm editing them together, I like to use cross-fading transitions and sort of overlapping audio tracks between scenes. Okay, all of that said, let's take a look at our tools here. Like I mentioned earlier, these are the tools that let us visually fine-tune our 360 video clips. I'm going to show you what kinds of fixes you can apply to your equal rectangular video footage using each of these. And again, don't forget, you can flip back and forth between this equal rectangular view in the Premiere window and the VR mode in the GoPro player to check on your changes in real time and see how they would look to your audience. I'm going to start with Rotate Sphere, because this one is the most important, because no matter what other visual fixes you want to make to your 360 video, you have to make sure that your image is properly lined up and centered. And I'll give you an example. You notice how in this clip the horizon is sort of sloping up on the right-hand side? I'm going to have to iron out that distortion, or that hump, as it were, in our sight line, or else, as you'll see, the scene is just going to look crooked and slanted in the finished video. So this is where you use Rotate Sphere to adjust this spherical video on its X, Y, and Z axes. Let's take a really quick look at what each one of these adjustments do here. Using tilt, or the X-axis, you can see the image kind of turning up from the sides of the frame, and at around 180 degrees, we've effectively turned the image upside down. Compare that to pan, the Y-axis. We're panning the camera across our field of vision. We are moving the image left to right, and adjusting this feature also effectively controls what's at the center of the frame in our 360 video. And with using the roll, the Z-axis, this one sort of rolls the scene up from the center of the frame. And as you'll notice, this also turns the image upside down at 180 degrees, so I think just for the sake of comparison, we should look at the X and Z rotation side by side. X-axis, you're turning the image up here from the sides, and with the Z-axis, you've got that figure 8 rotation going on from the center of the frame. So I'm going to use all three of these to adjust the horizon to be nice and even. And the way that I usually like to go about this is by starting by using the Y-axis to kind of bring the bump in the horizon to the center of the frame, and then sort of tweaking the X and Z rotations so that the bump in the center is evened out, and then that the sides of the frame line up with it. Alright, so let's work through this one a little bit. And I'm going to speed this up really quickly just for the sake of time. But once we're finally satisfied with the way that our horizon looks, both in equal rectangular view and in our GoPro VR Player, then we're all set, and we're ready to move on. Okay, let's look at this clip. You notice how in the middle you can see those sort of stitch lines, those arches near where the sun is. Now we want to conceal those, and that is where blur comes in. Now the first thing we're going to have to do is put a mask around our stitch lines, because if we just use the blur effect on its own, we're going to effectively blur out the entire image. So we're going to select the pen here, and I'm going to speed this up, but you're going to not drag any of the marks that you make, just click and then click on the next spot and a line will connect them. So we're going to draw the mask all the way around the sky, and when we're ready we will apply the blur. And there you go, that has blended the lines. Now, even though the stitch lines have effectively been edited out, as you can see the sun is sort of blotted out a little bit. It's lost a lot of its glow. So we can fix that using the glow tool. Now, Skybox Glow adjusts the range, the intensity, and the reflection of the light source in your 360 space. In this case, we're going to use it to give a little glow back to the sun and make sure that it is the right size. Because as you'll notice here, that when we first turn it on, the sun is huge in this shot. Like if we look at it at our GoPro VR Player, this is larger than the sun could realistically be. So we're going to adjust a couple of things, adjust the radius, the glow around it, the brightness. Okay. Until we're fairly satisfied with the intensity of the glow and, make sure that the light is believable without overwhelming the scene. Other features worth playing around with, sharpen. This is especially helpful with commercially available cameras, like the Nikon Key Mission and the Gear 360. It helps bring out the textures, especially the ones closest to us in the foreground. We're going to see a lot of the grass and sort of grit on the ground when we up the sharpen. But again, be absolutely sure you check on the results, and be careful not to make the image too grainy, because you're going to see a lot of sort of white spots, a lot of visual noise if you turn the sharpening up too high. Speaking of which, the Skybox denoise tool, I would use this sparingly if you use it at all. And even then, only if you have a shot that has a lot of noticeable grain in it. Because as you'll see, the wrong settings on denoise will really kind of blot out a lot of the textures and really just sort of make it look like somebody went over your image with a crayon. Again, play around with this, see what looks best for you if you want to use it, and be sure to check on the results and be careful not to make the image too grainy or too blurred out. Okay, so now let's talk about adding some overlays, whether it's captions, some 2D video clips, or some 2D images, which I'm going to use. I'm going to add the McCletchy logo. Now to do this, you're going to need the 2D project feature, because to just add a 2D image over a 360 video layer, as you'll see here in the VR player, that's going to cause the image to sort of be warped or distorted in the 360 conversion. So we want to prepare this, make sure it comes out right in 360 view. And to do that, we're going to use 2D Project. Now this is the one effect that you're going to have to drag not onto the video clip, but onto whatever 2D layer you're adding. So when we add it on, it sort of warps itself to fit in the 360 environment. And there are some features that we can adjust. Scale, this makes it look larger or smaller. In VR view, makes it look closer or further away from the camera. Rotate source, this angles the image on its own axis. And rotate projection. Now I would use this, not the motion effect here, but use this to move the object in place on its 360 sphere. Now this is especially useful if you want to cover up the tripod or the tripod shadow. And you can do this by adding a company logo or image over it and using rotate projection. When you're finished, just make sure that when you export, it matches the settings of your original clips, and that video is VR is checked. And that's post-production 101. So take the time to get a feel for these tools until you've got the best possible workflow to make your 360 videos look good. When you're ready to move on to the next step, I recommend moving over to Adobe After Effects, and we can point you to further instructions and more advanced tutorials on After Effects and Mettle Skybox Studio. Until then, thanks for watching.